Thank you very much, Dmitry. And thank you everyone who was able to be present today. And unfortunately, it's not a very good timing given the Memorial Day weekend. But in a way, it is a memorial, reminds us that we pay tribute to the memory of Andrei Sakharov and all those who stood with him and supported him in the world, in Russia, in Ukraine, and in many other countries. And I ask forgiveness of all of you, because I'm bound to repeat some of the things that were already said by probably Mario and Andrei, and even some others, but I do wish to give you not my version, but a little bit more detailed account of the Sakharov hearings. And I will say right away that I agree with Andrei that rejuvenation of Sakharov hearings doesn't seem likely, and perhaps it's not even necessary. And this is the part that I would come to in the conclusion of my remarks. So I will start with telling you that the year 1974, as quite a few other years, is reflected in the diaries, in the collective diaries of my mother, Helena Bonner, and Andrei Sakharov. He started to keep a diary under a lot of pressure from my mother. And the year 1974 opens with an entry about the expulsion of Lydia Chukovskaya and Vladimir Vainovich from the Union of Soviet Writers. It also records a 48-hour search in Kiev in the apartment of Viktor Nekrasov, writer and human rights activist. The entire archive that he amassed throughout the years since World War II was arrested. Then the diary continues with an entry about the arrests of Viktor Nikipelov and Sergei Pirogov, human rights activists and pravozащитники, as we call them, human rights defenders in Soviet Union. And it also marks the beginning of virulent anti-Solzhenitsyn campaign in the Soviet press following the publication of the Gulag Archipelago in the West. This campaign prepared the ground for Solzhenitsyn's arrest on February 12 of 1974 and his expulsion from the Soviet Union the next day. But before the news of his arrival in the West reached Moscow, an appeal that was mentioned by Andrei Grigorenko in support of Solzhenitsyn was ready at the home of my parents. And the Moscow appeal of February 13, 1974, demanded freedom for Solzhenitsyn and the creation of an international tribunal to investigate crimes against humanity committed in the Soviet Union, which were exposed by the Gulag Archipelago. This Moscow appeal was signed by Andrei Sakharov, Elena Bonner, Vladimir Maximov, Mikhail Agursky, Boris Shragin, Pavel Litvinov, who we are honored to have among the founders of our association today, unfortunately, who could not be with us. It was also signed by Yuri Orlov, the founding member of the Moscow-Helsinki group, the first group that signaled the beginning of the worldwide Human Rights Watch. It was signed by Father Sergei Zholutkov, a wonderful Russian Orthodox priest, censored by his own church and subjected to multiple persecutions by the Soviet power and the Soviet allied Russian Orthodox Church. It was also signed by Anatoly Marchenko, the tragic and heroic figure of human rights movement in the Soviet Union, and his wife Larisa Bagaraz. The Moscow appeal original is now housed in the Andrei Sakharov archive in Moscow. Once Solzhenitsyn was free and in the West, The idea of the tribunal faded away, only surfacing again in the 1990s with the creation of a Memorial Society and the failed Communist Party trial. However, in 1975, as Andrei already mentioned, in October, in Copenhagen, the first international Sakharov hearings took place, focusing on Soviet and Eastern European violations of international human rights standards. Described as one of the most established tools for informing the West about the situation with human rights in the USSR, and that was a quote, I think, from The Guardian, the hearings have varied considerably in breadth and depth. The 75 Copenhagen hearing publicized violations of the final act of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Helsinki Declaration. The 77 Rome hearings dealt with Soviet and Eastern European human rights violations. The 1979 Washington, D.C. hearings addressed labor union and workers' rights in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. The 1983 Lisbon hearings addressed oppression of creative workers in the Soviet Union and the state of martial law in Poland. The last 1985 London hearings returned to specifics of the Helsinki Declaration, drawing on human rights experts as well as witnesses whose rights were violated and or denied. The first hearing was the most contentious, politicized, and biased. It was plagued by conflicts between moderates who insisted on the need for objectivity and those with a more explicit political agenda who saw the hearings as an anti-communist operation. This caused Sakharov to voice his concern and criticism. It was also the reason he appointed my late husband, Efrem Yankelevich, to look after Sakharov's principles being adhered to and respected. Throughout all the subsequent hearings, Efrem played an important organizing and conceptual role, earning respect and admiration of his colleagues and Sakharov's approval and gratitude. Sakharov believed his representatives', I quote, logical mind, knowledge, and absolute integrity ensured the exclusion of any false, unsubstantiated, or sensationalist testimony, and the focus on significant issues. End of quote. It gives me special pleasure today to see Efrem's friend and Sakharov's hearing comrade in arms, Mario Corti, the force behind the 1977 hearings in Rome. Mario fully embraced Sakharov's vision of the hearings, guiding spirit, and was closely involved in the shaping of subsequent sessions. Sakharov felt that the success of Rome hearings and of the later ones in Washington, Lisbon, and London was due to the integrity and efforts of the organizers, such as Mario Corti and Efrem Yankelevich. The organizers arguably saw the hearings as a critical companion to the process initiated by the signing of the Helsinki Final Agreement in 1975. And we can now look back with appreciation at on the imprint of the hearings that in a short 10-year time opened the eyes of the mind and the minds of the free and liberal world to the reality of the lawlessness of Soviet totalitarianism and the defenselessness of an individual before an all-power state. Of ultimate importance to the success and credibility of the hearings, as well as their legitimacy, were several principles pioneered by Sakharov. They were: 1. Exclusion of confrontational Cold Warrior anti-communist rhetoric. 2. Use of human rights language. 3. No witnesses with extremist views, unethical stand, or untrustworthiness. 4. No sensationalist claims. 5. No intolerances, no intolerance, I should say, or prejudices. And 6, no propagandistic tone. These principles remain valid today when we face a very different world. Sakharov hearings meant a great deal to me, given the part my family and especially Efrem Yankelevich played in the hearings, that opened the eyes of the free world to the plight of human rights in the world struggling to become free. Why am I saying all this now, when we face infinitely more ominous challenges to human rights, world peace, and democracy? I want to remind everyone of the Sakharov triad that is now facing unprecedented threat. Sakharov triad was the one that he put together in his Nobel lecture. He put together the interconnectedness and indivisibility of peace, progress, and human rights. None of these is possible without the other two. It is an Sakharov theory of indivisibility of these three components, and it has never been endangered and ignored more than today. So, to go back to my question, why am I saying all this today? The threat posed by the Putin regime to the Western democracies, to international stability and peace, to the nation's right of self-determination, and to the very core of fundamental human rights was clear to me early in the beginning of the new millennium, with the coming to power of Vladimir Putin. However, today we face a crisis of totally different proportions. We have to contemplate our responsibility in the context of war crimes and crimes against humanity, unprecedented in Europe since the end of World War II in 1945. And here I want to quote a very controversial person, none other than Leon Trotsky. He said that the greatest historical, philosophical, and psychological work of our time will be written by the Commission of Inquiry. And that's where I want to say that while I agree with Andrei that Sakharov hearings will not be possible to resurrect as such a commission on inquiry, we must continue to work to create a new body. And here I want to invoke the Nuremberg Tribunal, designed not only to punish criminals, but also to deter future crimes. It had to deal with the new horrors of the 20th century. And I want to quote Justice Robert Jackson, chief US prosecutor at Nuremberg, who said in his opening statement, I quote, "The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant and devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated." End of quote. Non-governmental human rights tribunals proceed from the similar sense of urgency. They extend the spirit of Nuremberg to condemn a wide range of governmental repression as criminal. Non-governmental tribunals resemble the Nuremberg proceedings as they bring charges against government officials, appeal to public opinion, and have to bear tribunal critics. The Nuremberg International Military Tribunal considered 3 charges against Nazi leaders: crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Each of the charges, but especially the last, has important human rights implications. Crimes against humanity include, I quote, the tribunal charter: murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, and other inhuman acts committed against any civilian population before or during the war, or persecutions on political, racial, or religious grounds. End of quote. All three of the crimes the Nazi leaders were charged with are present in the case of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The third charge of crimes against humanity is particularly grievous. So let's make it 100% clear. Crimes committed by Russian troops in Bucha, Mariupol, Donetsk, Luhansk, Chernihiv, Bakhmut, these crimes amount to unspeakable, deliberate cruelty and violence against Ukrainian civilians. Rape, murder, other violent acts against people in the Russian forces' custody should be investigated as war crimes. International humanitarian law, or the laws of war, provides protections for civilians and other non-combatants from the hazard of armed conflict. Civilians may never be deliberate target of attacks. Non-governmental tribunals are tribunals of conscience, and their legitimacy depends upon public reaction. If we are successful in our efforts to document and condemn crimes against humanity committed by Russian armed forces in Ukraine, the public will assume legal and moral responsibility to keep Nuremberg alive. This will be done through tribunals in which principles derived from war crimes proceedings are applied to the cases of human rights violations. And in closing, let me say, in today's efforts to keep Sakharov legacy alive, the work of our association is essential for laying the groundwork for the future tribunal of crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine. And this is the title I propose, Tribunal of Crimes Committed by Russia in Ukraine. There is no doubt in my mind that this work is absolutely necessary for the worldwide effort to help Ukraine rebuild the country and the Ukrainian citizens to rebuild their lives, but also for the citizens of Russia to face Russia's and their own horrific past and to assume their civic and human responsibility.